Joanna Simpson had always been described as gentle, a loving mother, a loyal friend, quiet but strong. She wasn't the type to start drama, and certainly not the kind to end up at the center of a national murder case. But in October 2010, in the small village of Ascot, England, Joanna vanished. Her children were left motherless. Her body was missing. And when the truth emerged, it horrified even seasoned detectives. Because this wasn't a random act of violence. This was the deliberate, premeditated murder of a woman by the man she once married, her ex-husband, British Airways pilot Robert Brown. And he didn't just kill her. He buried her in a handmade coffin, in a grave he dug in the woods, weeks before the murder. This is the story of how obsession, entitlement, and calculated rage ended the life of Joanna Simpson, and why her killer may soon walk free. Joanna Simpson was born in 1966 in Wiltshire, England. Her parents, Diana and Peter Simpson, were loving and stable, and Joanna grew up in a close-knit family. She studied languages at university and went on to become a successful interior designer. But what really defined Joanna was her quiet empathy. Her friends said she was thoughtful, kind, the type of person who always made sure everyone else was okay. In 1998, Joanna met Robert Brown. At first, he was charming, an articulate, well-dressed pilot with a confident presence. He'd flown commercial airlines around the world and seemed stable and successful. They married in 2000 and settled into a large, luxurious home in the wealthy area of Ascot in Berkshire. It was the kind of life people envy from the outside. The nice house, 2 beautiful children, private schools, skiing holidays. But inside that house, things weren't as they seemed. Brown had a temper. He was controlling. And over the years, he became increasingly paranoid and emotionally abusive. He accused Joanna of undermining him. He resented her closeness with her family. And when the marriage began to unravel, his behavior grew more erratic. Joanna told friends she was frightened of him, that he monitored her movements, watched her spending, and belittled her in front of their children. By 2006, the couple had separated. Joanna filed for divorce and was granted custody of the children. Brown moved out, but not far. He bought a property just minutes away, and the legal battles between them dragged on for years. Brown was furious that Joanna had filed for divorce. He saw it as a betrayal, and when he realized he might lose more than just the marriage, custody, property, money, his rage simmered just beneath the surface. In 2010, as the financial settlement neared its final stages, something shifted. Brown started behaving even more strangely. He withdrew large amounts of cash. He purchased a pickaxe, plastic sheeting, and duct tape. And then he did something chilling, something prosecutors would later describe as meticulously planned. He bought materials to build a coffin, and he buried it in Windsor Great Park, deep in the woods, weeks before Halloween. On October 31st, 2010, Halloween night, Brown arrived at Joanna's home in Ascot to pick up the children for a prearranged visit. It was early evening. The children were excited, dressed in their Halloween costumes. Joanna welcomed him at the door. They went into the hallway, and that's when Robert Brown attacked. With a claw hammer he'd concealed, Brown struck Joanna at least 14 times in the head. She fell to the floor, bleeding, unconscious. The children, just 9 and 10 years old, were in the house when it happened. According to Brown's later confession, he told the children their mother had fainted. He led them outside, put them in his car, and drove away. But he didn't take them far. He dropped them off at a children's Halloween party, then returned to the house with his ex-wife's body in the hallway. Brown wrapped her in plastic sheeting, loaded her into the trunk of his car, and drove to Windsor Great Park. To the grave he'd dug weeks earlier, he placed her body inside the makeshift coffin and covered it with soil and leaves. Then he went home, like nothing had happened. The next morning, Joanna's mother, Diana Parks, became worried. She hadn't heard from Joanna and knew she'd never leave the children behind. She called the police and reported her missing. What followed was a frantic investigation. Police interviewed neighbors, searched the home, and soon they began to suspect Robert Brown. When officers visited his home, they found signs of something disturbing, items consistent with cleaning up a crime, unusual movements on his phone records. gaps in his timeline, but it was Brown himself who broke the silence. On November 6th, 6 days after Joanna vanished, Brown walked into a police station with his lawyer, and he confessed. He told detectives where to find the body, but what he said next stunned everyone. He claimed he didn't mean to kill her. He said he'd been under extreme stress, that he'd suffered a loss of control, that he believed Joanna had manipulated the divorce process, and that she pushed him over the edge. The police didn't buy it, neither did prosecutors. They charged him with murder. At trial in 2011, the courtroom heard every chilling detail. How Brown had spent weeks preparing for the murder, how he'd purchased the coffin materials, how he'd researched burial sites, and how he'd told no one because he didn't want to be stopped. The prosecution argued this was a classic case of premeditation, that Brown had carefully planned every step, that he waited until the children were home so Joanna would open the door, that he dug the grave in advance because he knew what he was going to do. But the defense played a different card. They brought in psychiatrists who claimed Brown was suffering from a stress-related adjustment disorder, that the pressure of the divorce had overwhelmed him, that he'd snapped, and the killing wasn't premeditated, but impulsive. Despite the evidence, the coffin, the hammer, the burial, the jury didn't convict him of murder. They convicted him of manslaughter by reason of diminished responsibility. The difference? Murder would have carried a mandatory life sentence with a much longer minimum term. Manslaughter gave the judge more discretion. In 2011, Robert Brown was sentenced to 26 years in prison, but with time served and automatic reductions, he could be released after just 13 years, meaning he could walk free in 2023. The reaction was one of national outrage. Joanna's family, especially her mother Diana, were devastated. They had sat through the trial, heard every brutal detail, and they couldn't believe the man who plotted their daughter's murder was being treated as if he just snapped. To them, this wasn't a crime of passion. This was an execution. The public agreed. In the years that followed, Joanna's mother became a vocal campaigner for justice reform, pushing for changes to sentencing guidelines in domestic homicides and demanding parole reform for killers like Brown. Her campaign gained momentum. She was supported by celebrities, politicians, and victims' rights groups. They argued that Brown's early release would not only endanger the public, but send the wrong message to women in abusive relationships. Still, the clock ticked down. In 2023, as Brown approached his earliest release date, public pressure mounted. The UK government intervened. Justice Secretary Alex Chalk announced a temporary block on Brown's release under new powers granted by the Police, Crime, Sentencing, and Courts Act. He referred the case to the parole board for review, citing concerns for public safety. But the debate is far from over. As of now, Brown remains in prison, but his future is uncertain. What isn't uncertain is what happened to Joanna Simpson. She was a mother, a daughter, a friend, a woman trying to move on with her life. She followed the law, filed for divorce, raised her children, and for that, she was beaten to death in her own home, with her children nearby. Robert Brown has never shown genuine remorse, he's never apologized, and he's never admitted that the murder was planned. But the truth doesn't go away just because you refuse to speak it. It stays. In the evidence, in the grave, in the lives left behind. Joanna's family continues to fight for justice in her name, and for every woman trapped in an abusive relationship, her story is a chilling reminder that even when you do everything right, danger can still be waiting. Behind the mask of charm, behind the face of someone you once trusted. The Halloween Hammer murder wasn't random, it was calculated. And the most terrifying part? It could happen to anyone. I'm Mason, and this is Mason Mysteries, where every story leaves a trace. Subscribe, stay safe, and never ignore the signs. Because every face hides a story, and some hide murder.